What do Apollo 11, Paris Fashion Week, Disney World, Harry Potter, and the iPod all have in common? Well, stick around, and we'll tell you. Hey there, how you doing? Pleasure to have you along on this, the 13th, the lucky 13th edition of Conversation Collage. Hi there, Ken Johannesson at your service here. What those things all have in common is that they are among a list of the 50 most influential projects of the past 50 years. And we'll be talking about that list with the folks at the Project Management Institute. I bet you didn't know there was such a thing, but it's very interesting, and we'll have that. This whole episode devoted to project and management. After we talk about the 50 most influential projects, we'll talk about why everybody needs a good manager and what goes into being a good manager. Now, you don't think that has anything to do with your daily life? Well, it does. So stick around and we'll tell you more. First off, we'll start off with the 50 most influential projects. The World Wide Web, the Euro, Paris Fashion Week, they all have in common that they are included in the 50 most influential projects of the past 50 years, a collection of the major events, advancements, and initiatives that have impacted the world in different industries, locations, and generations. And we talked about all of this with Cindy Anderson, who is the Vice President of Brand Management for PMI, the Project Management Institute.
Hi, Ken. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Where are you today?
Today I'm in Helsinki, Finland.
Finland? Now, that's not home base for you, is it?
No, I'm based out of Philadelphia, but I'm here for the Nordic Business Forum.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, great. That's marvelous. First off, we're going to talk about the 50 most influential projects on the list here, but first let's talk about the Project Management Institute. What is that?
The Project Management Institute is a membership association, and we represent about 3 million people around the world who are involved in project work. Some of them are certified, and others of them just realize that project management skills are really good things to know as they're trying to get work done in this world of constant disruption.
Mm-hmm. Now, PMI has come along with its 50 most influential projects of the past 50 years, which is a collection of some major things here. Before we get into the list, define a project. What does PMI consider a project?
Well, you will see so many interesting things on this top 50 list, things that wouldn't normally be considered a project. Yeah. Sometimes people think of, buildings or bridges or things like that. But you're going to see things on this list like Paris Fashion Week and the Harry Potter series. So it's really what we're seeing in the world is that pretty much everything is a project. People come together to get something done, and that's a project.
Okay. What brought about this list? What gave you the idea for it?
Well, PMI turned 50 this year, and as we were celebrating our 50th anniversary, we thought it was a good time to take a look back at the projects that had the most influence on the world over the last 50 years, not just based on what they delivered, but for what else they enabled. For example, Atari is on the list, and that was a pretty awesome first kind of attempt at gaming, but it ushered in a gaming culture which has turned into a $150 billion industry with people that are coming together globally to play games. World of Warcraft is also on the list. Mm-hmm. And now gaming has become so popular it's got its own top 10 list.
Right, exactly. So a lot of things are not that we don't consider projects because Atari, to me, I hear Atari, I hear a company, because there was a company called Atari that made the Atari whatever it was that back then.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So this is going to change our idea of projects. So what are some of the things you talked about? Some things that are not considered, some unusual things that we would not consider projects on the list. Tell me about the list. What is on there?
Well, there are. We started with a list of 1,000 projects, and we narrowed it down to these top 50. It was a difficult project in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the things that you might be surprised to see on the list are something like the euro, getting many countries, leaders together to agree on a common currency. Something like Alibaba's Singles Day, which has turned into the largest shopping day of the year in the world in not very many years. Things like the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. So all of these sorts of activities or efforts that served to change the world that we live in through being a successful project, but also kind of enabling other projects to then take their learnings and go from there.
Right. What stood out to you as you were compiling the? I take it you were one of those people involved in putting together the list. What stood out to you? What were the things that said, okay, this deserves to be on this list?
Right. I was lucky enough to be part of this project, and it was really a fantastic team. I think one of the interesting things for me is. Number 50 on the list is the Sydney Opera House, and I think from an iconic architecture point of view, we all recognize it with its pointed roofs and so forth, right? But from a traditional project management perspective, that would have been considered a failed project. It was wildly over budget, and it didn't get completed until way beyond its deadline. And yet, from an influence perspective, it was incredibly influential because it changed the way we think about architecture. It changed the way we think about tourism. It changed the way we think about buildings. And that's why it made the list.
Where does project management come into all of these things? How did they help turn these things and make them real?
Well, as we see the world becoming more and more of a project economy, and organizations kind of structuring around doing projects to be really flexible in the face of disruption, what we're seeing is that the skills that project managers have are really valuable to anybody who's, a young person coming out of college and starting a job. They're going to work on projects. There's just no way around it. Or anybody who's been in the workforce. And we tend to think about the skills of a project manager as things like scheduling and budgeting, which are really important. But what they're really good at is being a good leader and developing effective collaboration and rallying a team around a vision, like the things that we see on this list, so that they produce the result and even beyond the result.
So let's talk for a second about these are projects that we think of corporate, we think of industrial, we think of government, doing these big projects. Is there anything that we can take out of project management and put into our own daily lives?
Well, I think so. Just as the way organizations' strategies are delivered through projects and programs, the goals people set for their own personal lives can also be achieved using those good project management principles, things like using a disciplined approach to planning and doing, learning to be a good leader, learning collaboration skills and how to kind of motivate the people around you that need to help you create your, turn your idea into reality to move in your same direction. And I think you mentioned mindset, that mindset of continuous learning and exploration, because what worked to solve one problem yesterday probably isn't going to work exactly the same way on the next problem. So it's important to have that full backpack of up-to-date skills and competencies, and that's really what project managers, I think, bring to this.
Ms. Anderson, what did you learn from this list?
Well, I learned that there are a lot of interesting projects out there in the world, and it is not easy to come up with 50 that are the top ones.
Right. What do you think? Are there any projects going on today that you're aware of that you think might be included in a top 50 or a top 100 list maybe 50 years from now?
I am absolutely 100% sure that there are, and stay tuned for next year's list to find out what those are.
You're going to make a new list next year, huh?
I think we might.
Okay. All right. Well, where do we find the current list? Where do we find out more about all of this?
Your listeners can find the top 50 most influential projects of the last 50 years at PMI.org.
PMI.org. I'm on that website right now. I'm looking forward to going through the list. I thank you, Cindy Anderson.
Excellent.
I thank you for some time out. Best to you in Finland and back to Philly.
Thanks so much.
Cindy Anderson is the Vice President of Brand Management at the Project Management Institute. If you go to PMI.org, right there on their homepage is the 50 most influential projects of the past 50 years. And it's quite interesting, so I would tell you to go to that website. I have been there. As a matter of fact, I'm on there right now. And if you click on the numbers, they are all listed along the bottom. It will show you in kind of cascading fashion about what those projects are. And if you click on a particular project, it will give you the story as to why it is among the most influential projects. It's quite an interesting website, so I would invite you to check it out. It's Conversation Collage coming at you here. Remember to check us out on Instagram at Conversation Collage Podcast, and also like us on Facebook, Conversation Collage Podcast there, too. That's our page, and we would love to have you like it, and also tell your friends that we are here. As we're doing this podcast, WeWork, the company, is big in the news, particularly on the business channels, and apparently that company is in a bit of trouble and is needing a rescue as we go to press at this time. One of the emails I get on a daily basis comes from Alan Murray, who is the editor of Fortune magazine, and he put it pretty well at about the time their IPO was going down in flames, and he wrote about it, and I think he makes a pretty good point here. And from here on, I'm quoting Alan Murray. The briefly lived plans for a WeWork IPO surely will be the high watermark of the current tech bubble. How could anyone have believed this money-losing real estate play was worth $47 billion? The fact that many did is evidence of mass delusion, and perhaps also evidence of the cravenness of investment bankers jockeying for a prize. It's also a testament to the extraordinary charisma of Adam Neumann. Neumann's business model doesn't have any of the magical benefits that companies like Uber, Airbnb, and Netflix enjoy. There is no special technology, no low marginal costs, no network effects. All it really had was Neumann. But he was literally larger than life, 6'5", with an endless exuberance that made powerful people like Jamie Dimon and Masayoshi Son want to believe in him. His wasn't a real estate company or a technology company. His was a culture company that was going to elevate the world's consciousness and create a communal utopia rooted in his own upbringing on the kibbutz. Compared to the dour Kalanick or the cerebral Chesky, he was a constant celebration, a self-contained bubble, powered, we now know, by tequila and pot and dreams of trillion-dollar wealth, everlasting life, and becoming president of Israel, or the world. So that raises the question. Now that Neumann is no longer at the helm, what's left? At Uber, Dara Khosrowshahi inherited a two-sided marketplace that can't easily be displaced. The new co-CEOs of WeWork, on the other hand, inherit a lot of long-term leases and an army of short-term lessors who have access to alternatives that are sprouting daily. At the time the IPO was canceled, talk on the street was the valuation had dropped by 2/3 to $15 billion. But even that estimate may be heroic. Earlier in September, the Financial Times put the number at $3 billion. And with losses of $2 billion a year and a possible recession looming, you might wonder whether it has any positive value at all. The words of Alan Murray from Fortune magazine. If you want to know more, you can go to fortune.com and check that out. All of the proceeding kind of comes under the heading of management, doesn't it? And wouldn't you know, we'll talk about management right now. Todd Davis is the Chief People Officer at Franklin Covey and co-author of the book Everyone Deserves a Great Manager, the 6 Critical Practices for Leading a Team. That book is based on decades of research and hundreds of leader interviews into what makes managers successful. And we caught up with Todd Davis, who told us all about his book. Todd Davis, where are you?
Well, I'm based out of Salt Lake City, Utah, but today I am in Columbus, Ohio. I'm out this week with the launch of our book, giving some keynotes and presentations on the book.
Mm-hmm.
for different companies and organizations.
The Chief People Officer at Franklin Covey. That sounds like a very informal title for a very heady role.
Well, it's a title I love. I'm viewed as more or less the